Hello one and all, welcome to Discover Dorico for June. Today, if you're watching this live and you've forgotten, it's Wednesday the 24th of June 2020. If you're not watching this live, then you know when this session was recorded. We'll be using Dorico 3.5 in this session. I'll be using mostly Dorico Pro, I think, possibly or only Dorico Pro, but actually a lot of the things that we're looking at and discussing in this session are also possible in Dorico Elements and even Dorico SE in a lot of cases. Thank you, Mark, for telling me sound is perfect. I will carry on and get on with it. If you're anywhere near where I am today, I know we're English and complain about the weather, but it's really hot here at the moment. We shouldn't complain, but I'm inside. So if there's any background noise, it might be the fan. Sorry about that, but hopefully everything is all okay. So the first thing I wanted to talk about today was just a quick roundup of a few things which I guess are from third-party companies, but they're useful things that I wanted to make you aware of in case they are useful to you. I'm not saying I use one or any of these things, but I thought it was useful to talk about. The first is a couple of these things actually have been around a little while and I haven't mentioned them, so apologies. So the first is the Notation Express Stream Deck profile for Dorico. What's that? Well, a Stream Deck is a little device, you can just about see it on this video. It's a little device, sits on your desk and has lots of buttons, and they're useful. They come in at least 2, if not 3 different sizes. And these buttons are then shortcuts to things. And Philip and Leo at Notation Central have put together a Stream Deck profile. So if you buy one of these devices and you want to use it for shortcuts for Dorico, then you can buy this little profile. It's all mapped out for you, and a lot of the shortcuts are then available for you on that Stream Deck. So if you're the kind of person who switches often between different devices, well, it's only main devices. Maybe if you switch between different notation programs and you just want that button to be the right shortcut, then this kind of thing might be useful for you. So you can get that from Notation Central. I'll put links to all of these in the description underneath the video. Also realise as I've started I haven't said hello. Sorry, I am here really, but I'll get on with the things that are up here out of the way. Yes, oh, Philip's online. Hello, Philip. NotationCentral.com. Yes. Also, on a similar kind of front, if you are the owner of an iPad, then you might find something like Metagrid useful. I'm still playing a little bit with Metagrid, so I'm not going to show you in anything in great detail on either of these two systems today, but I just wanted to make it known that if you go to metasystem.io, this is actually an iPad app actually, so you'll find it on your iPad. It's now, they've all these shortcuts and things that you can configure in Metagrid. So the idea is, instead of using a physical device with buttons on, you can use your iPad screen and tap on the buttons that you set up here in Metagrid and use those to control shortcuts in Dorico. So that's another useful option. One of the things that made me realise we should probably talk about these things is this week I was made aware that kbcovers.com has a Dorico keyboard, which you can have a PC version of, which I think is backlit. I've not actually seen any of these yet in the physical. There's also here a Mac version of the keyboard, and if you are a Mac laptop owner, then you can also get a keyboard cover. Let me just click on that one, I might show you in a bit more detail. So, will this show me? Oh, that's not a very big image, is it? Never mind. There are these like silicon covers that you get that overlay on top of the computer, and they have the shortcuts on them as well. So at the moment, there's a little tells you here they're for 13 and 16-inch Mac laptops at the moment. If you need other language keyboards or other language covers or anything else, get in touch with these people directly. It's not something I sell or anything like that. But get in touch with them if you need something in a different language or a different type of laptop. And I think in most cases they'll look at demand and work out what they can do. Of course, if you use either of the first two options, so the Stream Deck profile or Metagrid, then the language isn't as important anyway because you can set the shortcuts that way. Also, there's a whole load of questions. Hang on a second. Let me just check can you maybe not write so many comments and then I can keep up? They're all good. Yes, brilliant. Saying hello. Yeah, okay, I know we complain about hot weather, it's not really. I mean, it's 30 degrees Celsius, but we don't normally get that far, and we don't have aircon. He has a face, yes, I do, sorry. a question about using it in different languages. That's fine. And yeah, okay. Sorry, I haven't missed any questions. Good. Let's move on. So also, there's now a Getting Started with Dorico 3.5 book. So musictechtuition.com, they've done a book. If you are, I know some people like to be able to print something. Obviously, we have our online manual, and the reason we don't make a book is that our online manual will be well over 1,000 pages, I think now. And Lily's doing a very good job of that one, and that's obviously going to have up-to-date information in and where you need to find things. And I find a searchable PDF, for example, very useful, as well as being searching online. But if you're the kind of person who wants a book, a physical book, then you can now buy a Getting Started with Dorico 3.5 practical guide. There's information on this page about where you can buy it from. This one is linking me to Amazon. There's also a sample of some of the pages, so if you want to have a flick through some of the pages, then they you can have a look at the style of this book and see if it would be the kind of thing you would be interested in. So that's this one. Again, it's not something we're making. Darren Jones has made that one, and I actually just to prove it physically exists, I actually have a copy. Look, I have. I actually need to read this now. So I don't know. I can't tell you any more about it yet. I haven't read it, but I will get there. Also on useful things, so it can keep going. So previously you may have tried the November font or November 2 font with some other applications. This has been available for a little while with Dorico, and there are sort of examples on the webpage here. This is the Clem Music site, so clem-music.de. Again, I'll put all these links at the bottom in the description later. But there's various things that you can do font-wise if you want it, and because it's now in Smoofle format, you can use that very easily with Dorico. Also, this week, the BopMusic font, so these are jazz fonts basically. This one is now also available for Dorico, and there's a RealScore one here as well. These ones are on norfonts.ma, so you can have a look at some of these if you want to. And the details on their site. I think, unfortunately, at the moment, maybe the Sibelius and Finale ones are on offer and the Dorico one isn't, but that's probably because the Dorico one's very new. But yes, you can have a look on Nor Fonts. Again, links at the bottom. Actually, you can also get those same fonts. Here's BopMusic if you're going to Notation Central. So if you were looking at the Stream Deck anyway, then you can also buy fonts from them. So I just wanted to, like I said, a just quick roundup of the kind of things that are available. And I'm just I will, as always in this session, try and keep an eye on the comments and try not to make any mistakes that people then shout at me in the comments for. Let me have a quick look. Yes, I think we're okay. There's a few conversations about languages for the Stream Deck. And J.E. Hernandez, no, I don't have anything to tell you about harmonics tucking under a slow line at the moment, but we are aware. So let's carry on. So today what I would like to talk about is expression maps and playback templates and a little bit of some of the changes we put in 3.5, but also now there is a lot of conversation on the forum, a bit on Facebook as well, about creating more expression maps and using them with Dorico and how you do that. So a little bit of this has been covered before in an earlier session. We did, can anybody remember when? There was a session we did where I kind of explained how expression maps and percussion maps and everything are all mapped together. There's also a couple of videos from Anthony on this, but what I thought we'd do is maybe put some of these together. And I'd also thought we'd do that using the BBC Symphony Orchestra library by Spitfire. There's a couple of reasons for this, and this is just the spitfireaudio.com website. So BBC Symphony Orchestra is a library which actually, if I scroll down here, so they brought out a while ago. The professional version here is very expensive. It says the new gold standard. I'm sure I've seen that somewhere before. Let me know in the comments if you've seen that before. Anyway, so they do a professional version, and then more recently they've also announced a core version, which is a little bit cheaper, and they also have a Discover version, which is in my currency £49 or free. So you get the choice. And basically the choice is, if you want to try this out with Dorico or any other sample library, then if you click on the free option, basically if you fill in their survey, then in 2 weeks' time, they'll then send you a license for free. So you just have to fill in the survey and wait 2 weeks, and you get it for free. And if you want to, you can also buy it for £49. So I thought this was a good option to look at that's accessible to a lot of people that you can then use with Dorico. So what I'm going to do is look at the Discover version very quickly. I'm not trying to sell you this version, but the reason I'm also looking at the Discover version is that they show you in this little table the difference. The number of instruments between the 3 versions, the number of techniques obviously is very different between the 3 versions, but also importantly the size is very different between these 3 versions. So this one, if you want to try it out and try out some of these techniques in Dorico for setting things up, is only requires about 200 megabytes of size. The core version says it 23 gig, and the full version would require 600 gigabytes. So I thought maybe we'd start with the Discover version because it's a bit more accessible for people. So that's the one we're going to use. And just out of interest, the main differences between the core and professional version, because I am going to do a template for those, is the professional does have a few more instruments in it and a few more techniques, but the biggest difference is actually in the microphone techniques, so what they call signals. And that's the big difference in the size, actually, of the physical size on your hard drive as well. So anyway, so what they've done is they've done this free version, as well as the other versions, and they also have another site called SpitfireAudioThePage.com, and in here they have templates for things. So they've got templates, and so when you scroll down here, it says for the Discover one, for example, they do templates for all 3 versions. They have a GarageBand, Logic, Pro Tools, Cubase, yay, Reaper, Studio One, Label template, but there's no notation templates. There's no Dorico template in here. So I'm going to make one. And although it won't be available on this page today, and also I've just realised as I've been preparing this session, I've made a small error, so I'll fix that first. But after this session, if you want my template for this, then I'll send you my Dorico template, and more importantly, my Dorico Playback Template, which I'll explain during this session, and that's what we're going to set up. And then when I've done that one, not in this session, but afterwards, in the next, hopefully, week or 2, I'll set up other templates for the core and the pro versions also for this, and also make them available on this webpage. So if you're watching this in, let's hopefully say July, and you're watching back on this session, go and visit SpitfireAudioThePage.com, and hopefully you can get the Discover and the other templates for BBCSO from there. Are there any questions about that? Oh, somebody's just asked, will the Pro Expression Maps be available anytime soon? Now, I think that's the wrong question. But yes, as Paul said, there are core expression maps on the Dorico forum already, and I'm going to be looking at some of those. But what I also want to do is put them together as a playback template, because that's so much more useful, and I'm going to show you how to do that. But what I want to do is, because this is applicable to any other sample library you want to use, I want to show you right from the beginning how you put this together. Paul has explained some of this on a forum post, so some of you might have read some of those details, but I thought it was worth looking at in one of these sessions, and then you can answer questions as we go live. And Paul said it is a work in progress. Yes, so I need to look at some of that. Now, if you're thinking, but I don't use that library, I use something else, and I don't want to make any of these, this is too complicated. Well, these ones that I'm doing at the moment, I'll make available. So if you want to use BBCSO, I'll make that one available. For other ones, we kind of partly need to know which ones you want, but I'm not saying that the Dorico team is going to be able to make you all of these, but other people may be able to help. So other people on the forum or other people who use these libraries, and sometimes, commonly with setting these libraries up, you need a fair bit of in-depth knowledge of some of the libraries to know the intricacies of how you want to set them up. So I want to show you in this session how you set these kind of things up, and then we can generally, as a community, hopefully we can generate more of these and make them available for people, so you don't have to know absolutely everything. Let me just check the questions. Does the BBC survey require you being located in the UK? I don't think so. I don't think you have to be watching the iPlayer at the same time either. And why are they more useful than expression maps? That's what we'll get to. This is my dream come true. Well, maybe. let's see. So, what we're going to do now is, I'm going to start a new empty project. I'm not expecting you to follow along, because obviously you'd have to already have BBCSO installed and that kind of thing. But I want to show you the kind of processes I would be going through to set this kind of thing up. The first thing actually is, in the preferences in Dorico, in VST plugins. If you haven't already, untick this Open VST plugin windows when opening projects. What will happen by default is often Dorico will start up and then it will also load the Halion window and it gets in the way, or it sits on top, or it hides in the background and you don't want it. I untick that so it never shows up, and neither do any of the other Contact, BBCSO, any of the other VST plugin windows, because I only call them up when I want them, so I have that turned off. I'm going to start by adding some players. I could actually add an ensemble, I guess. Let's do it with an ensemble. So I'm going to add a single woodwind ensemble, and I also need a piccolo. So I'm also going to add a piccolo, and I'm going to put the piccolo at the top. So now I've got piccolo, flute, oboe, clarinet, and bassoon. So what I'm going to do to start off with is kind of set up the physical connection, if you like, into BBCSO. So here I am in play mode, and at the moment we've just got Halion loaded. And if I expand these, and then you'll see, for example, the piccolo is using Halion on slot 5 because I added it 5th, and these will be using 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I'm going to do is choose this one here, and I'm going to say that I want to use the BBC Symphony Orchestra for the piccolo. Now this first bit is going to seem a little bit more complicated. Like I said, I'll explain later on how we can make some of this simpler, but I want to show you how all of these things work so that you can have an understanding. So I'm going to load BBC Symphony Orchestra in there. I'm actually going to make the Dorico window a bit smaller because here it is. Now this is actually showing me in the core version because I do have 2 versions installed at the moment. So this is what the Discover version will look like. So I've asked Dorico so far, please show me a BBC Symphony Orchestra. And here it is. Here's one of them. And now you can click on these to load a sample. Effectively, you click on the instruments in this diagram here. You can choose them from this drop-down list. So there's a little list here, and you can choose them from here in families if you want to. But you can also just click on them in the orchestra. So here are the piccolos. So I want piccolos in slot 1. And down here it's telling me the type of effects that this piccolo can play. It can play long notes and it can play staccatissimo notes. So what I'm going to do now is let's look at both of these at the same time. So I've loaded one slot in here, and I'm going to tell my piccolo to use that in slot 1 in channel 1. Now as far as I know, actually this channel doesn't matter, because over here in BBC Symphony Orchestra, it's saying MIDI channel any. It will actually accept any MIDI channel, so I don't think that bit matters. But I like to keep it in the first channel, and for Dorico's purposes, it does matter, because then it will matter for the endpoint that we'll use in a minute. So anyway, to start off with, piccolo, BBC Symphony Orchestra. So if I go over here and I was to say let's just add a few bars and say into here, if I was to put some notes into here. Always check which octave your MIDI keyboard is in before you enter any notes. So now I get some notes. So the first one, of course, isn't going to play because it's too low for the piccolo, so let's bump them all up an octave. So that one's set up and playing, but we need to do a few other things. So these ones here, you'll see as I click on these notes here, you'll actually see them. We're all the way down here. They'll play these notes on the keyboard so that you also know it's connected. So that's all right, but that's it's only playing these long notes. So now the point of expression maps, in the play menu here, when you go to play expression map, the point of expression maps is to be able to switch between longs and staccatissimo, or longs and any other technique. So for example, over here, when you load the strings, they've got multiple techniques that you can use. Put that back on piccolo. So the point of expression maps is to let Dorico automatically switch those, but by default Dorico doesn't know what it needs to do, so you need to set a new one up. So I'm going to press plus down here, and I'm going to set up one, and I'm going to call it BBCSO Discover, because that's the version of the mode, I think they call it, for Discover Pro or Core. So I'm going to use Discover, and I'm going to say winds. And the reason I'm going to do this as a winds one is that over here I have already noticed that the flutes all have the same 2 techniques, and actually the brass do as well. So in the end this will be winds and brass, really. In fact, we can do that now. So we could say winds and brass, because all of the winds and brass use the same techniques, whereas the strings have more techniques. The basses have slightly less techniques, but more than the winds and the brass, and the all the percussion at the back here, they're going to have different types of techniques and different kind of options. So we're kind of grouping things together in a way that makes sense. So I've created a Discover Winds and Brass, and I can get rid of that. This just expands and contracts. And then I can add a natural technique here for this Winds and Brass. There's a few questions that it looks like, so bear with me a second in the chat chat on the side. Bear with me a second. Yeah. Paul's answering some of the questions. Thank you, Paul. I will give a link at the end of this session. I'll put a link in the description to the forum post that Paul's talking about, because some of the other expression maps for VSL and some of the other things are there already. So I will put a link certainly. In fact, if you go to dorico.com/forum, if you want to go there right now, then you can do that. And Paul's expression maps for Dorico 3.5 is what's called a sticky post, so it stays at the top. But have a look at that one. Yes, depending on the library, depends whether you're switching by channel or anything else. So yes, that can potentially make a difference. So, can we use in Dorico 3.1? Yes, mostly. I'll come on to the changes from there. But as Paul said, there are many new features in Dorico 3.5 for expression maps, and I'm going to look at one of those in a second as well. So, if you've got an expression map already from our forum, you may not, you won't need to do necessarily this bit, but I want to explain fully how we do all the sections. So I'm creating an expression map at the moment for this one. So I've said I've got a natural, which is, we haven't told you what else to do, just play me a note, please, Mr. Instrument, or Miss or Mrs. Instrument. Now, I know from reading the manual for this library, BBCSO, that Spitfire libraries often, if not exclusively, use middle notice C4. That only matters because I'm going to reference that as I'm going to specify which notes I want in which octave, so that's important. I also know there are 3 options here for control changes, program changes, and event note changes. Now, in this particular case, I need a key switch option, not for example, a control change option. Some Spitfire libraries and some other libraries use control changes, but in this particular case, I need a key switch. And the key switch I need, now this was actually tricky to work out, and I'll show you, just because it amuses me, the only way that it seems possible. The manual doesn't tell you. Thank you, Spitfire. And actually, the best way to find out was, even in the free version, you can't really find out, apart from trial and error, which takes a long time, and a big keyboard. If you have spent money on the core version tells you over here what the key switches are. So the longs are C-1. You see over here it says C-1, and the staccatissimo is C#-1. Now I know at some point somebody's going, what? I just don't understand. Don't worry, like I said, I'll make this available to you after the session, but I just want to, for some people, they want to know how I've put these things together. This is the full version, I guess. So, normal notes are going to use this long thing, which we've just found out is C-1. So, key switch C-1. I also, from reading the manual, know that the dynamics are controlled. I'll show you what I mean, because I have somewhere here the manual. Honestly, reading manuals is useful. At the end of the manual, it says dynamics 1 for the CC mapping. Also has expression on 11 if you want it, but it tells you which CC you need to use, controller change CC. So in this particular case, the dynamics are going to use controller change 1. Great. So natural uses this key switch and that control change. Great. Now it won't work yet. The reason it won't work yet is that although I've told my piccolo to use the BBC Symphony Orchestra, great, I need to tell it which expression map I'm using. So this little cog here loads this endpoint setup dialog. We've looked at this one before in sessions before, and then it will show you various options in here. So it shows you what's going on in this dialog. So I can then find out for, now there's an interesting one. It's got the signed instrument, the other one. We'll come back to that. So I'm going to say I'm going to use the expression map for that one. And I'm going to basically do this for all of these instruments, so you'll see what's going on. So you see, oh yes, it's because they're all using the same slot on the same channel. That's the problem. So I need to add, now in this particular, you know when you use Halion, it has one interface with 16 slots in it. BBCSO and other libraries don't often work like that. So I need to press plus and I need to add a new BBCSO for each of these instruments. So here's another one, switch to Discover mode, which I'll use for flutes. I'm going to move that onto my other screen for a second to keep it out of the way. So now I've got another one here and I can line that one up so that it says it's using that slot in channel 1. So now my first one is using, Piccolo is using BBCSO Discover wins, great. I've also ticked this box. Did I just do that without realising? Possibly I did. Because I only want one output to show in the mixer, and I'll show you why. Because in the Dorico mixer at the moment, you will end up with things like this, where you have a couple of instruments loaded and loads and loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of blank slots, which are not useful at all. So what you also do in this endpoint setup dialog is you set the expression map and you tell it the number of outputs to show in the mixer. So I'm going to do that for the second one here. This flute, I also want to use the same expression map and only one output in the mixer. And then I'm going to press plus. I'm going to set up another one using BBCSO. Ta-da! Here it is. This one is, I need to put it in Discover mode. This one I'm going to do for oboes. I'll close that for a second. So my oboes are going to use that new one, which is this one here. It's going to use the first channel, the first slot, and it's going to use the expression map here, and it's going to use the first slot in the mixer. You can see now why this is a, yes, being nice. It takes a little while to put all of this together, and I'll explain why you don't want to do this a lot and how we don't need to do this a lot. Clarinets, where did I get to? Clarinet, here we go. Clarinet needs to go to that new slot, slot 1, and it needs to use the Discover winds and brass and don't show anyone in the mixer. And then the last one here, aren't you glad this is a small family of instruments? Oh, it's loaded on my second monitor. Here it is. What was it? Bassoons. Here we go. Here's the bassoons. Close that one. So my bassoons down here in Dorico, expand that. And I want this to show as the last one here. And number 1, and over here we want to use the expression map. We're nearly there, we're almost there, and show one output in the mixer, and it means that the mixer now looks like this with only these slots in. Hooray! There was much rejoicing. Were there any questions while I did all of that? Brass and wind players too. Yeah, okay. I'm a sax player, don't tell anybody. Yes. There are. How does the player know that the piccolo is on channel 1? In this particular case, it doesn't matter. But if you see up here, piccolo is on channel 1 here. It actually doesn't matter. But it says here, for example, O2 BBC Symphony Orchestra, which is using this one. If you didn't have any of these windows open, and you were confused about what you might have set up, or you've opened My Template, for example, there's also a little keyboard icon here. And if you click on that, it will open the correct version of the sample player that's controlling that one. So there's the piccolo one, and this one down here is oboe. So it will load the oboes one. It will load the correct one. But you can also tell because they're numbered here, and so they will match. And that's how you can then make sure that you set up an expression map for each of those. So I've done that bit. However, in my expression map, now if you're going to be doing any work on expression maps, please first go to the preferences, which is edit preferences on PC, and on a Mac it's in Dorico preferences. Go to key commands, search for expression, and in here for expression maps, save yourself a shortcut, because then it means you can be in any mode, for example this mode, right mode, and you can hit your shortcut for it and you can get to the expression maps dialog. It will save you a lot of time of switching modes and that kind of thing. I will get to soloists. I've just seen the question in the comments. Yes, absolutely, we'll get to soloists. Let me just have a look. Yeah, I think that's feels like this misses the benefit of having multiple MIDI channels and audio outs. We do. Oh, I see. That's from an earlier. Sorry, that's an earlier question that Paul's answering. Okay, great. So anyway, so what I also wanted to say was that in this Discover Winds and Brass, I've assigned natural. Great. And yes, that button is going to play the wrong octave. Let's have a look at what's going on at the BBCSO end here in our little player. So this little play button, by the way, for piccolos doesn't work because it will play the wrong samples. But let's not worry about that one. So now we've got a bass patch here. See, it's playing the wrong octaves, but that's fine. I also want to add the staccatissimo. So I press the plus, and I will just start typing because it's quicker. Get me to staccatissimo. And from earlier, I found out that that uses a key switch of C# -1. I also want to use the same control change that I was using before. So the natural is set to C -1 and the staccatissimo C# -1. So now I can change between those two for any of these instruments. So if we go into the flutes, for example, here, and we enter some notes flute, I should have put staccatissimo on and I forgot, so I'll do it now. In fact, in the first bar, let's put these down here instead and do this for flutes because it's not quite so piercing. So now when I play these notes, I should get long. And then I didn't get staccatissimo because somebody pointed out the obvious error. Oh, there's a good question. The solos could come from another library. Absolutely, I'll get to that. But I will... Yeah, sorry, I need to do this bit first. But absolutely, we'll get to that. Anyway, sorry. So also, what you might want to do is... I need to rush ahead now. They're getting ahead of me in the comments. The other things that I might want to do, and that I have done in my version of this, is I might want to say, for example, that I want to use staccato to also use the staccatissimo sample, because they don't have staccato, but I might want to use it. So you can create a new one here, although if you're cheating, then you can just choose this one. You can press this button, which will duplicate the technique. You can then just edit it, and so you can just change that one to staccato. So now we've got staccato in there. And I also, and this is for Dorico 3.5, I've also decided that I would quite like a new natural option. In fact, I'll do a copy of my natural option. But I would like a note condition, because actually I found for the pieces I've been working on, if I set a note condition that says very short notes can also use the staccatissimo, because they're just a bit more detached. And it makes a bit more sense. I'd also found there's an option for volume dynamics and a range here between 1 and 127 because of MIDI. And I found that 30 was going to work a bit better for that. So you can make these little tweaks, and this is where I said you might want to make changes to how some of these things work if you know the library. And you might want to take somebody else's expression map and make some tweaks to it based on the kind of things you need. There's also a case, for example, where actually this particular one, maybe in one piece you don't need it. Instead of deleting it, just untick the enable button. But anyway, once you've set all of this up, I do suggest creating things like adding some short notes, adding some long notes, playing some little melodies, making sure they all sound correct, making sure that if you put a slur over them that they also make the correct changes and all this kind of stuff. And making sure everything's set up correctly so that you've got the right expression maps loaded and everything else so that everything works. When you're happy that you've got it all set up, then what you should do in play mode is use this little button down here which says Save Endpoint Configuration. Down here, we're all the way down here. And what this will do is save the status, or the state of these slots that I've loaded. So therefore it knows that piccolo should use this one, and it knows that flute should use this one. So you press this button, you get this little Save Endpoint Configuration, you give it a new name, and you save that endpoint configuration. I'm not going to do it in this case because I've already done one of these and set them up. So you save that. Then, probably, you carry on to the next set of instruments. In my case, I'm saving this one just for the winds because I've saved an endpoint, what we call an endpoint configuration for each of the families of instruments, and I'll explain later why that's useful. But it may be, for example, you want to do the whole orchestra and save all of these all at the same time into one. That's fine as well, no problem at all with that. So then what you end up with is a file like, I'm going to jump ahead slightly. I'm just going to open another file for a second. You'll end up with a file like this, where you might have played back a few things, tested a few things to make sure they're working for you, some little bit of music. And also what I've done in this one is I've not only created solo players, I've also created section players in this one. So in play mode here, you can see I've actually got solo players and I've got section players loaded here. So for example, this bassoon here, this one is using slot 11. And I can press this little keyboard here and it will open to show me that it's using the bassoons. Now the reason I've done that this way in this particular case is that in this library, this free version, you get a single piccolo, but you get a section of flutes. It's flutes A3, it's oboes A3, clarinets A3 and bassoons A3. For example, for the trumpets, they're also the same. The tuba is of course on his own. The horns, there's 4 of them, so they're actually section sounds. But if you're using this library, then you don't get the choice of soloists. But with some libraries, and with the other versions, the core and the pro version of this library, you would get a solo flute as well. So in that case, you would choose your solo piccolo and solo flute. So in setup mode, your soloists, you would send them to the solo patch, and the section players you'd send to the section patch. And so when you've done all of that, you'll end up with this kind of same setup here. And so you save your endpoint configuration. You'll then have your soloists and your section players loaded, and that will be very useful later on, as we'll get to. So let me just check I'm not missing anything. In the comments, bear with me a second. Paul's also said there aren't any solo players in BBCSO Discover, incidentally. Well, there are actually. The piccolo and the tuba are, but most of them are section. Let me have a look. Paul's doing a very good job, thank you, Paul, of answering some of those questions as well. No worries about disrupting my flow. That's kind of why we're here, really, and why we do it this way. Yes. Grant, yes, good point. I might need to update it and save my endpoint, but that's fine. Paul's answered those, that's great. So I'm going to carry on. I think we're okay. What's the CPU memory on all those VSTs? Well, at the moment they're not playing, so they're not doing a lot anyway. I suppose if I loaded all of these, then we can find out in a little bit. It'll also depend on your computer and everything else. If you want to know, then this particular Mac has 32 gig of RAM, if that helps. I'm not going to get anywhere near that with the kind of things we're not doing here, though, because the amount of space the Discover library uses is not very much, so I think you'll be okay. Also, although I'm setting all of these up in one project with lots and lots and lots of instruments, in reality, I'm not ever going to use these. I'm very unlikely to use this combination. What I'm doing at the moment is setting these up as an example, which I will then use and we'll show later on. So then what you've done is you've saved the endpoint configuration. You've saved, at the moment, I'm doing it in families. You might have saved a full orchestra, but I'm doing it in families. I've saved those, and I can go to Playback Template here. Now these Playback Templates, you see here's one I made earlier. These Playback Templates, the factory ones, are the ones that are included with Dorico. So the one you normally use probably is HSSE and HSO if you've not used any other libraries. If you have Note Performer installed, it's also installed a Note Performer Playback Template. So what you want to do is create a new one. So I'm going to effectively make this one here. You create a new one, you give it a name. So this is the Discover session with the Discover BBCSO. This is Discover. Yeah, okay, it doesn't matter. BBCSO. Okay, so we know it was the Discover session, Discover Dorico, Discover library. Thank you, that. BBCSO. Now you want to add some entries. The automatic entries are the ones that are shipped with Dorico or installed by, for example, the Note Performer installer. So those are the automatic ones. But there's also manual ones. All of the endpoints I set up are manual options here that I've set up. So here's the winds one I set up. I did my brass one actually separate. So I've also got brass, and I can also add in pitch percussion and unpitched percussion and strings. I won't bore you with the entire setup, but what I've just done, setting up all of the solo and section players for each of those families, assigning them all to the BBCSO, loading in the right slots, assigning the right expression map, setting up the expression maps in the first place, listening to them all, deciding if I wanted the note lengths to be, conditions as to how they change, making sure they all switch appropriately for tremolos or whatever the other techniques are that they have. I've done all of that for all of these families and then saved an endpoint configuration, and that's got me to this point where I can then add them into my list here. Now, I will come back to family overrides and instrument overrides, but I've now got them in here. So I've got a Discover BBCSO, and I could save that. So I have my my playback template. The reason that's useful, if I just press close, is if I now go to a Dorico template, let's say the Classical Orchestra. The Classical Orchestra in Dorico, when it loads up by default, will have a number of instruments, so flute, bow, clarinet, bassoon, etc., and then the string section. And this one, if you look in setup mode, has got some soloists and some sections. So this is why I needed to set up sections as well as soloists. And it may be that depending on how you've set up your orchestra, you might have used section or soloist players, and we know now why that makes a difference. So what I can do is, if I go to play mode, you see it automatically loads into Halion. This is what I meant about Halion, just uses one window with a number of different slots in it. But I can now go to play, and I can go to playback template, and I can choose, I'll choose the one I made earlier. This is the one I made today. I choose the one I made earlier, apply and close, and it will now load into here all of those instances that I need, one for every instrument. And the play button is no longer green. It's loading, and when it's finished loading, the play button will go green. So that's the one up here that I'm talking about in the toolbar. So we can just wait for that one for a second. And because I don't have my VST windows shown at the very beginning of this session, that's one of the things I mentioned, it's not showing me each one of those as it loads, because there's no point in stressing the computer out more by showing me 12 of these at the same time. So now they're all loaded. So if you check any of these, for example, here's my flute, or let's go to a random one. Here's the French horns, and if you click on the little keyboard, it's loaded the right sample into the horns there. So now these are all set up. So now that I have a playback template, all I need to do, whether I've got a file from somebody else, one I've worked on previously, or anything else, all I need to do is go to playback template, and I can then choose the playback template for BBCSO Discover, and it will load that one automatically. So while I will share a Dorico project, in fact I'll show you, I've then set up a Dorico file which is not in that list. Hang on. Here we go. I've set up a BBCSO Discover template. Your solo horn is mapping to horn A4. Yes, it is. That's because there isn't a solo horn in the Discover version of this library. So I've mapped to the closest option, which is, in this case, is going to the horn A4. So there's 4 horns in a section. When I do the mapping for the core version of this, where there is a solo horn and a horn A4, I'll map the solo horn to the solo one, and the section players I'll map to the section sound. So yes, there is a depending on your library, depends how they map. For the Discover one, it's more important that they work and that we get a horn sound. So that's the way it works. So in this one here, in this library and this template, what I've done is I've set them up as the players are in the BBCSO Discover. So I've got a solo piccolo, but I've got horns as a section, and I've got a solo tuba and harp and all of these other percussion instruments down here, and then I've got sections for the strings, because that's the sounds that they give you in BBCSO. Also what I've done is I've only added one percussionist here with all of the unpitched percussion. So if you do use this template, then you'll find that in write mode you'll get the first one. When you go to galley view, you'll then see all of the percussion instruments here, depending on which ones you want to write for. But they're all pre-mapped and they're all set up. And the idea with this is actually that really, if you start with this one, you can start with this template and you can delete any of the things that you don't want. You can remove any of the other instruments that you want. But what I will also give you with this file is the playback template. So what you'll need to do just once on your computer, you can actually, when you have the hub open, so what I mean is this hub, there will be a file which will just be a Dorico PT file. So this BBCSO Discover PT that I'm dragging onto it, you can just drop it onto the hub, and that will then import that as a playback template. Or you can go up here when you're changing modes. You can go up to play mode. In fact, is it? Yes, it's loaded all the samples. I did that a while ago. You can go to playback template, and you can import and of course export. So you can import the playback template. Now the reason you do that and import this BBC Discover one is that if you then in this file create a new piccolo, or if you right click on this and you duplicate this piccolo, then Dorico will know how to go and find you the piccolo sample from BBCSO, because it uses the playback template to do that. So my template, this Dorico template, is useful as it exists, but if you make changes, add in new instruments to this, solo or section instruments, or if you want to combine it, use the playback template with one of your scores that you've already written, that's when you'd need to use the playback template and just go to play and playback templates. So this is also how, if you have Note Performer, you can very easily switch to Note Performer sounds. So now you have the option of switching to Note Performer or our default sounds, depending on the version of Dorico you have, or if you have bought or the free version of BBCSO Discover, you could switch to that one should you want to, just by importing that playback template, and Dorico will load everything automatically. Yes, it will depend on the amount of RAM as to whether it can play all of those instruments and the specs of your computer, but the setup side of that is all done. However, you still may need to, based on your needs, go to the expression map and make changes. Maybe you don't like, for example, the note length option I've put in. Maybe you want that not to be very short, but you want it to be short. If you're not sure what the short and very short means, I mentioned this briefly before and maybe forgot to show this image. So I did this little map. Now, I was obviously feeling in a slightly 70s mood when I coloured this one, so apologies. I will try and give this one to Anthony so he can colour it in a slightly better way. But here you can see, for example, at the tempo I'm currently at, which is just our default is 120 BPM. So at 120 BPM, somewhere in this range, a semiquaver, or a 16th note, is very short. So that's how you know what to map in the expression map. If the piece speeds up, then actually the very shorts become quavers or eighth notes. If it continues to speed up, then they could even be crotchets. And somebody, when I put this on Facebook, somebody said 640 BPM, and they were laughing at me. Well, not only did it finish off my table nicely, but Vili very nicely found a file, a composition that somebody had done where they did use 640 BPM. So anyway, but yes, so you can then see from this table, when you're playing notes into Dorico and having them play back, and you say, oh, I'd like a bit more separation just on the 8th notes, just on the 16th notes. 16th notes, at the tempo you're at, you can then map which one of those they will map to. And if you decide to vary your tempo while you're composing the piece, then Dorico will be switching automatically the various types of samples. It's all very clever. So that's where the very short would happen in here, and you could change this if you preferred it to be short. Or, I don't like this option. Why have you put this option in? I don't like this option. You can delete it, but in case you might want it later, how about just disabling it for this piece, and then you don't need to use that option. Of course, there are other things in here like mutual exclusion groups. I haven't needed to use those very much because, for example, if you look at the strings section we've set up, where again there's a condition here for note lengths. The pizzicato, spiccato, staccato, various other things I've mapped into this one. But the exclusion groups I've just left on auto. So it's choosing automatically that these techniques can't all be played at the same time, and therefore Dorico is doing that bit automatically. So you can leave that bit, at least for this Discover template. Once we get onto core, it might be a different question. Right, let me just have a look in the questions in here. Bear with me a second. Tiago, you were asking about horns. Did you do that or did it fall back to it? I did it because when I set up the brass version of the file, I set up both solo and section horns and mapped them both to the same patch in BBCSO, and so that's included as part of the playback template now, so Dorico knows to pick for either of those. I'm just reading the comments. If you have any others, then please write them in there. Blending multiple libraries. Good point. Good point. So now we've got a map to switch completely to BBCSO. But what you may also want to do in your playback templates, and here another problem you might find with this one is, for example, you might say, I'd like to use BBCSO Discover. Let's use this one that we were playing with earlier. So what this will do, if I edit it, it will load the sounds from here. However, BBCSO doesn't have cor anglais. It doesn't have bass clarinet. The Discover version doesn't have various instruments. It doesn't have a piano, for example. So if you add a piano now into Dorico, Dorico will go, great, I'll add a piano, and it adds a piano staff, and then it looks for the playback option, and it finds your playback template, and it goes, is there a piano in here? No. Pitch percussion, but there's no piano in it. No. There's no pianos in any of these, therefore I will not load any sounds. So you will have a piano staff, but it won't make any noise. So what we'd also potentially recommend is you use the add automatic, and you add the option that you have, your version of Dorico. So let's see, and I'm using Pro, so I'm going to use this one. And you add that as an option at the bottom. Because Dorico is going to work down this list, it's going to not match any of these, and it's going to get to the bottom, HSSE and HSO, easy for me to say, and it will say, I'll use that one. So then I'd get an extra slot at the bottom in play mode for HSO, and it would load in the piano, for example, or the cor anglais from that one. So now I ought to change this one and say maybe it's BBC Discover and HSO, or even HSSE and HSO, for example. However you want this labeling to be. Maybe Dorico defaults or whatever. So now you could set up that one. So now I've got a just BBC Discover, and I've got a BBC Discover and a fallback of using our default libraries. Or maybe your fallback is Note Performer. So for example here, I've got some combinations that I've set up of Note Performer and other things, or our Olympus Choir and Note Performer. So if there's a singer, use the Olympus Choir, and if there isn't, fall back to Note Performer. And all of that's doing here is it's saying use HSSE, our defaults basically, the Dorico defaults, for singers, and Note Performer for everything else. So when I click on this one, you'll see I have a family override. So I've pressed the plus button here, and I've added the family of instruments that I want to use for that one. If it's not an entire family, if you say it's only the solo violin that I want to use from something else, you could also, let's say, add manual strings for the Discover one we did, and say instrument override. Maybe I want to add a solo violin. No, actually there isn't one in this, but it doesn't matter. You get the idea. I don't have a library at the moment that does. So you could say BBC Discover strings if there's a violin, but HSSE and HSO for singers, all of them, and Note Performer for everybody else. So you can set up a playback template that matches exactly what you need. And save that one. Actually, I should have saved that one with a better name. So you save that one with a name that makes sense to you. So you can then import and export these if you have another computer you want to put them on. The other useful thing you might have is that if you are really getting into one of these libraries, you might not take that library with you all the time. So maybe on the laptop that you travel with, you only have the Discover version, and on your main machine you have the core version of BBC Discover or any other library. So you could have a different playback template. So you can take the same Dorico file, apply the playback template that you're using when you're traveling, and then when you get back you can apply a different playback template that uses a different version of that library. So that's why the playback templates are really useful. So while I started at the beginning talking lots about expression maps, I think you ideally want to know a little bit at least about how some of these things work, even if it's just making tweaks to an existing expression map. But in the end, on a daily basis, potentially, you'll be using the playback template option to just load in the playback template that you have already set up. And if you have a favourite, then although Dorico by default will use this one, in the preferences in Dorico you can set up your default playback template. So if you have your multiple libraries or anything else set up, you can load that as your default every time you start a new project in Dorico. Right, I'm just going to have a look at the questions again. A question about adapting effects and reverberation. Paul's answered that one. Yes, I should check just after because Paul's answering some of those. Great. There was a question about if I add an English horn, will it have to draw in from another library? I think hopefully that one's just covered. So in this version that I did here, what would happen now is, because, what did we ask for? English horn. English horn doesn't exist in any of these, so therefore it would fall down to this one, and it would load the default sound that we have, unless you've set up another library for those two. If you have violins 1 and violins 2, can you ensure they're loaded in alternation when adding more violin sections? Yes, Dorico will know which one of those they are and which ones you'd mapped, so that you'll get the right ones when you add the second violins. Can you... Oops, sorry, my screen just jumped. Bear with me. I think there's another question coming in. Sorry, hang on a second. There's a question about using Contact. Actually, I did a small Contact version with a couple of things loaded in the video of the 3.5 launch. But Dor, if that's not all the information you need, then get in touch. I know you have my email address. And if anybody else has any questions after these sessions and you're saying, well, but how about... Oh, and I forgot to ask you this. My email address, as always, for these is discoverdorico@steinberg.de. Discover Dorico is all one word. So discoverdorico@steinberg.de. And don't forget, of course, my colleague Marcus will, I think, be doing another session next week, I think. Or the first Tuesday in the month, he'll be doing a session in German as well. So we now have the Dorico auf Deutsch as well. And you can email him on doricoaufdeutsch@steinberg.de. With me a second. Yes, there's a question about loading the snapshot you saved. Yes, you need to kind of set them all up, and then they would be... what we're effectively doing is reloading that snapshot. There's a question about East West Symphony Orchestra. I don't have that one installed to know details about that one. Paul might have. Maybe we need to look at that one in another session. But if you have specific questions about that one, Grant, then send me an email and we'll see what we can do on that one. There are options for portamento. It may be that using an add-on technique would work. I know that some libraries you would use that for things like vibrato as well. You'd maybe use that as an add-on technique. Maybe we'll look at that in another session at some point. Let me just carry on reading the questions. It's good, some good comments today. Thank you. Oh, and showing the choir, that was going to be one of the questions. Okay, that's good. A way to scale a dynamic response curve to match different libraries. We are looking at some options for giving you some different options, at least, to match different libraries, but not in the version of Dorico I'm using today. What's the symbol in the right of the playback template for HSSE and Note Performer? That symbol is a factory. So these are the ones that are installed by an installer. These three are actually installed by the Dorico installer, and this one by the Note Performer installer. So it's a little factory. And if you don't want to see the factory ones, you can just turn off the factory, and then you don't see the factory icons anymore. Oh, sorry, my display jumped. Bear with me a second. I think Paul's almost getting to these questions before I am. I am at least 10 seconds behind answering these as well because of the delay on this live stream. Yes, we have plans. Oh, Paul's mentioning that one yet, to switch on other conditions. I think Paul's answering those ones. That's good. So. There were some other things I was considering looking at today, but actually maybe we've got to the hour. We should probably stop. So as a quick roundup, then yes, one of the other things I was potentially going to look at in this session, but maybe it will be the next one, was to do with importing music XML files and the specific things that I needed to do to kind of tidy up a file. So it was bringing in a file via Music XML, which happened to be for big band, so using the right fonts, setting the right paper sizes, and tidying up things like the slashes, and the drum parts and things like that. But if that's of interest, then let me know, and maybe we can look at that in another session. If you have any other XML files where you're saying, here's my file from other notation program, and here's the PDF. When I import it into Dorico, what do I need to do to get it to look like the PDF version, for example? Which settings do I need to tweak, change, or anything else? That's the kind of thing I was potentially going to look at. So if that would be useful and you have other examples, then please let me know. So I'll continue reading the live chat, but as I said, as always, if you have questions about things, you can always email me on discoverdorico@steinberg.de. And as I said, this Discover template, there's a couple of little things I'm going to check in it, but if you would like a copy of this template, at the moment the easiest option is probably to email me. So if you email discoverdorico@steinberg.de, and then I can send you a copy of this one if you want to try it out. As I said, mentioned at the beginning, the library that we've been using for this one as an example, if you try it as an example, it is available for free if you want to. So if you go to Spitfire, you can sign up for free. There is a 2-week delay. You sign up, you answer their questions in the questionnaire, and then they'll send you a code, or it's £49. But the options that we've looked at and how we set up playback templates and everything else can be used with lots of things. I know Spitfire and some other companies have free VST plugins. We've looked at some of those in earlier sessions as well. But I wanted to kind of, once you start getting into this, it's a slippery slope. You start buying more than one. But I want to, help people as much as possible, make it as simple as possible. And my aim is that very soon on this Spitfire Audio, the page, for example, we'll include a Dorico template down here so that you can download it from there. And then I'll also look at, if I just go back a step, because on their templates page they have pro templates and they also have core templates, then I'm going to look at creating the expression maps and the playback templates for those, and Dorico templates for those as well, so that in the morning when you've got an idea, you don't have to go through all of this to set everything up just to start a composition. You can just load your file, you can apply the playback template that you need and just start writing, and the technique switching and everything else will be done for you, and also done in a way not the same as a DAW, where you might have all of these techniques loaded as individual slots in individual tracks, but we can keep them together in a notation sense that makes sense, so that you've just got the one instrument that will automatically switch the techniques for you. So I think I'm going to stop talking. Could I? Oh, there's a question about the custom choir to note performer. Yes, okay, let's just have another quick recap on that one. So in the playback templates, the ones you'll already have in here, you'll have, for example, the HSO one, and you'll have the note performer one. So if you want to use note performer most of the time, what I would probably do is make a copy of it. So use this duplicate button. So you're using note performer most of the time, and maybe we're going to use the Olympus choir. I think that was the question. Oops, I can't spell today. So we're going to have note performer in the Olympus choir. So we'll add an automatic option for HSSE and HSO, because the Olympus choir comes with the pro version of Dorico. I'm going to sort these two, so I'm going to push that one up so that I've got this one first, and this one I'm going to say there's a family override for the singers. So now any singers will come from this one, and you see when I click on Note Performer, there's no particular overrides. That will cover everything else. So that's all you need to do. That playback template will now load. We'll use this one just for the singers, and it will use Note Performer for everything else. So press OK, and you now have a new playback template that you can use for that. So I'll keep an eye on the chat for a few more minutes and see if there's any questions on there. If you have any further questions after this, or if you've not been watching the session live and you have a question, then please email me on discoverdorico@steinberg.de. And one last thing that I want to bring to your attention is that if you visit our blog and you go to, in fact, it's probably going to be this top item. It is Dorico Switch Stories. We would love your Dorico Switch Stories. Have a look at this one. Basically, record a little video, landscape if possible. Please record a little video telling us about how you've switched from another program. Your experiences, good things, hopefully. Anything else that you would like to tell us about, record a little video and send it to us. You can also send it to us at the same email address, discoverdorico@steinberg.de, and the date for this is the 10th of July. The details are all in this this blog post, but if you could please send me your Dorico switch stories and say, you know, what you particularly like about Dorico or switching or anything else, that will be really useful, please. So if you could send us those, I will enjoy watching those, but we're going to use them then as in some of our campaigns. So there's a campaign coming up about people switching, and what we'd like to do is, yes, there are people, you know, like Alan Silvestri who have switched and they are using Dorico, but we'd like to hear your stories. We would like to hear from any individuals who have switched and the things that you really liked about Dorico. So please get in touch with us and use these options and send us a video about the Dorico switch stories. So like I said, I'm going to keep an eye now on the chat for a few minutes. Tutorials on importing MIDI music XML, Sibelius and Finale files. Great, there are a couple of options available on our channel, so have a look on that already, but if they would be useful to have another session on those, then let me know. How long should the videos be? I don't think it matters on these Dorico switch stories, but we're only likely to use short clips, but it doesn't matter. So get in touch with us after this on discoverdorico@steinberg.de. I'll read the comments as always. And thank you for watching, and we'll do another one of these sessions next month, so it'll be towards the end of July. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.